Good afternoon, ladies and gents. We're going to go ahead and go over a couple of the questions in your common assessment from today's work. Now, go over these questions. We're only going to go over about half of them. This is to help you understand some of the test-taking strategies and skills that you'll need to start developing on your own. Just like with any skill, we can show you what you need to do, but you need to develop it yourself. We can't force you to develop it or give you all the information you need for it. You have to get good with it yourself. So that being said, let's go and go over our first couple of questions. We'll go over a couple of basic ideas to keep in mind whenever you're taking a test first, and then we'll get into our sets of questions. So our first couple of ideas that we want to make sure that you understand and that you're following along with is the idea of any multiple choice test. A multiple choice test always has 4 answers starting off. Everyone should know this. We have A, B, C, and D. Starting off, this is how most any test will start. Now this also incorporates a really common idea that there's always one correct answer, one very incorrect answer, and then 2 very close, seemingly correct answers. So we have to keep that in mind whenever we come across a multiple choice test. Now is this always the case? No, but it is generally the rule. And I say generally very lightly there. So we usually always have a correct answer, a throwaway answer, then we have 2 very close correct answers. I'm going to put almost correct. One concept you can always keep in mind whenever you're answering, especially a state test, is the idea of the word best. A lot of times that's the word that you have to hinge your ideas on, is which answer choice best answers it. And that's kind of the rule of thumb that you have to keep in mind. The best answer. While you might have 2 answer choices that seem correct, or you might have 3 that seem correct, you have to figure out which one best answers the question. And that word best is a really tough word to follow along with when it comes to state-style test taking skills. That being said, though, there's a couple things to keep in mind with this. Also, something to keep in mind is your time limit. Whenever you have a state test, you are given a time limit to finish it. That time limit that we usually try to give you is about 30 minutes per set of questions. So for today, we have 1 set of reading and a set of questions to go along with that. We really hope that you are able to finish this within 30 minutes. So that's 30 minutes in total. That's why today, if you're part of my class, I actually put that time limit on this. Now, in this 30 minutes, you have a couple things you need to do. You need to read the passage, you need to read the questions, and then you need to answer the questions. So let's figure out a little bit of math here in English class to help us out. So you have 30 minutes total. If you take just about 15 minutes to actually read the passage, that leaves you with just 15 minutes to answer the questions. In those 15 minutes, if you take about, with this example we have for today is very easy. There are 10 questions. So if we take 10 and we divide it by 15, we have just about 1.5 minutes per question, per cue here. Now that's actually a really easy form of time, and you can give yourself more time if you finish the reading faster, if you have more time to answer the questions. But let's take this number in consideration. So we have just about 1.5 minutes to read a question. If I timed it, and I did during my first block, how long it takes to read one question and the answer choices, it takes about 30 seconds to read that out loud. That gives you a full minute of time just to sit there and think which of these actually answers the question itself, which one is the best answer for the question. Now this can change every once in a while with how many questions you have, depending on the reading and things like that. And usually they give you about 2.5 hours for the state test, so they give you way more time than this. This is what we want y'all to be able to do in about a minute and a half per question. But if you want, you might actually have about a full 2 minutes to 2.5 minutes per question. That's a really long time when you actually sit there and focus on that during that whole time. Those are things to be aware of. Which is the best answer? Not the one that sounds right, but what is the best answer? And also keep in mind your time limit for each question. So these are things you want to be aware of before you even get started with your test. Now about your test, your assessment today is a passage from JFK's speech when he's talking to the National Football Confederation. I have it here. Here we go. From address in the New York City at the National Football Foundation and Hall of Fame banquet by President JFK, John F. Kennedy. Now remember here, this is a speech presented. That's an address. So make sure that you're aware, whenever you're making a speech, you only have really one goal, and that is to convince someone, to use rhetoric, to persuade. That's really it. So we have to figure out what is JFK trying to persuade us, the listeners, about. So make sure you're aware of that before you even get reading. You have to make sure that what you're reading and what is the impact of it, why do you supposed to read it. Those are good ideas to keep in mind. But let's go ahead. You should have already read the passage. Let's go ahead and get to the questions themselves. Question 1 reads, read the claim in paragraph 1. So we have to keep in mind now that there is a claim that we have to make sure we know. Read the claim. And what is the claim in this sentence? I do see a close relationship between sports and our national life. I sometimes wonder whether those of us who love sports have done as much as we should in maintaining sports as a constructive part of this country's existence. So the claim here that we have is there is a close relationship between sports and our national life, and the important part of it, I sometimes wonder whether those of us who love sports have done as much as we should in maintaining sports as a constructive part of this country's existence. So there's this idea that sports is supposed to be constructive, it's supposed to be beneficial, helpful to the people that are participating in them. So which quotation from the passage provides relevant evidence to support the author's claim? Notice there, which one provides relevant evidence? So which one actually makes sense for us? That tells us that a few of these will not help us at all. Starting with answer choice A. I will not enter into a debate about whether football or baseball is a national sport. Notice here, we're talking about we should be maintaining sports as a helpful, constructive part of this country's existence. How is talking about which sport is our national sport doing that? I'll go and tell you it's not. So we can go ahead and actually mark this out. Just by reading through the answer choice and actually figuring out, does this actually go with our answer, our question? And it doesn't very easily. We find that. It's not relevant evidence. B, despite our much publicized emphasis on school athletics, our own children lag behind European children in physical fitness. Now I have to figure out, is this relevant evidence to how we should maintain sports for a reason, to help us? It is talking about how we are lagging behind, so it does seem to support this in some way. So for now, let's go ahead and circle this one as a possible choice. C, I did not say this in order to decry excellence in sports or anywhere else. Now, is that relevant evidence? Yes, it is evidence, but does it really support this idea of maintaining sports as a constructive part of this country's existence? It doesn't whatsoever. So that's another one that we can actually mark off because it does not actually support, it's not relevant to what we're talking about. And finally, D, no one knew this better than the men of Greece, to whom our civilization owes so much. Now that is true. We do owe a lot to the men and women of Greece, but that does not really support the idea of maintaining sports as a constructive part of this country's existence, especially when you take the context of what he says here. We'll talk about context in just a few moments. So D is also not correct. That leaves us with only one possibly correct answer, B. All we did here, ladies and gents, was go over each answer choice, and we tried to figure out Is it relevant evidence? Does it go back to our question? We found out here that 3 of them do not, and only 1 does. That being said, for sure A is going to be a throwaway answer, and D is going to be another throwaway answer. C, I could see where someone could get confused about that. So C is a possible choice. But remember, we're not looking for which possible choices. We're looking for the best answer choice. And the best answer choice for this one is going to be B. Continuing from here, we're going to have a really interesting idea that we need to bring up for question 2. And that is what is called context. Context is very important. You can take some small little piece of information out of context to mean a whole different thing. For instance, a couple things taken from, you could say politics. You could use this with science. You can also do this with the Bible. You can do this with a lot of different aspects of life to twist its meaning. For instance, with politics. A lot of people claim that President Donald Trump, our previous president, was a racist. What they did to decide this is they took small little snippets of his speeches and they said, oh, this is what he meant here. It's just a tiny little snippet of it. That's taking all of his words out of context. Now, people have been doing this in politics for years. They're doing this currently. Some people to Biden. They did it to Donald Trump. They did it to Obama before him. They did it so on and so forth to George W. Bush and whoever else. They've done this in politics for a long time. Taken something out of context and they switch the meaning of it. They do this in the Bible as well. People have taken little small snippets of the Bible and tried to convince people that this is what it means. It's taken out of context. So we have to make sure that we are aware of the context of these questions and of these answer choices. How do we do that? Very simply, we go make sure that we have read the passage. That's a really important key detail to make sure you're doing. So let's take this question 2 here. They're going to take a sentence out of context. What you need to go do is go make sure you understood where it came from. So question 2, read the sentence from paragraph 3. Gibbon wrote 2 centuries ago that professionalism in amateur sports was one of the early evidences of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. How does the sentence refine the author's ideas about professional sports? Now here's the question, okay? How does this sentence, the tiny simple sentence that we have up here, refine the author's idea about professional sports? How would you know what the author's ideas about professional sports is supposed to be? The only way you could know that is if you've actually read through this paragraph and the following paragraphs to make sure you knew that. If you just went to this question and tried to answer it, you would get this wrong. You have to be really careful about that. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and go back to our passage. Here it is. And let's read through paragraph 3, and let's go continue on with that to paragraph 4 as well. This reads, professional athletics, I believe, have a great place in our national life. But I must confess that I view the growing emphasis on professionalism and specialization in amateur sports without great enthusiasm.
Third lunch, blue dine-in.
So, that right there tells us the context of the sentence from our question, which is the last sentence of that paragraph. Right here, we're not talking about just sports as a whole, professionalism in amateur sports. That's not the issue, okay? What's the issue is that this professionalism also creates specialization in amateur sports. That means very few people play the sport and a whole lot of other people watch it. This is supported in the next paragraph, paragraph 4. An example of this. Football today is far too much a sport for the few who can play it well. Notice that few who can play it well is the specialization people. The people who play it professionally are the only people who actually play it. So this paragraph, paragraph 4, is an example of the ideas brought up in paragraph 3. Football today is far too much a sport for the few who can play it well. The rest of us, and too many of our children, so everyone else, a larger group, get our exercise from climbing up to seats in stadiums or from walking across the room to turn on our television sets. And this is true for one sport after another, all across the board. He continues on from there. You can see more of the context, but that helps us understand the context of the question itself. This sentence, Gibbon wrote 2 centuries ago that professionalism in amateur sports was one of the early evidences of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. It means we have a really small batch of really good, strong people who play this sport, but we have an even larger area, a larger group way over here that all they do is just watch. They just go, that's cool, but only a small group can actually do the sport itself. This says that this whole large group is just kind of sitting there. They're doing nothing. They're like bumps on a log. And that's what JFK does not want. He wants a huge group of people to be able to play the sport and do it well, not just a small professional few. So be really careful about that. Now that we know that context, let's go look at the question again and the answer choices. So how does the sentence refine the author's ideas about professional sports? A, by emphasizing that professional sports have existed for many years. Did he talk about how professional sports have been around for years? Was that the important part of it? No, not at all. He did mention that it's been around for 2 centuries. He did, yeah, but that does not talk about his real ideas about professional sports. B, by highlighting that excellence in sports does not ensure success in other areas of life. He did highlight excellence in sports, the professionalism idea, but he does not talk about success in other areas of life. So here we have a partially kind of correct answer. Yes, he did talk about excellence in sports, but no, he did not talk about success in other areas of life. So this is kind of like a maybe half right, half wrong. We'll circle it for now, but we'll come back to it. C, by exaggerating the consequences of focusing too much energy on professional sports. He did kind of mention that. Remember my diagram over here. The large circle of people who watch, the tiny circle of people who actually do. He said this is the issue. We only have a small group of people who can do this activity and a whole large group who can't do it at all. That's focusing too much energy on professional sports. So this is a possible correct answer as well. D, by highlighting the contrast between the amateur and professional sports. By highlighting the contrast between the amateur, he does not do that at all. He talks about both of them, but he says this is an issue of making amateur sports professional. That we have a small group of people who can do and a large group of people who can't do. So that cannot be correct either. So now we have 2 possibly correct answers. I'll go ahead and tell you the one that best answers it is C. B here is not the correct answer. C is the only one that seems correct all the way through. B, we noticed, remember, we said it was only half right. So the best answer is going to be C for us. We figured this out because of context. Remember, y'all, context is king. Don't take anyone else's word for something that is said or spoken. Go look for it yourself and figure out the context. This is actually a really important key detail when studying any religious text, especially the Bible. Context is king. Go back. Context is king. Go back and actually figure out the context of any verses you hear or listen to. Continuing on from there, then, we have question 3. Read the sentence from paragraph 6. And astonishingly enough, when Dr. Krauss and Dr. Weber recently went back, after 10 years, to Europe, they found a sharp decline in the physical fitness of European children, because in the last decade, mechanization had begun to get at them too. So here is another one that we need to make sure that we understand the context. This is another context question, but that being said, we can go ahead and continue on from there. We can actually answer the question just with this, but you do need to make sure that you understand the context of it. So how does the phrase, get at them, impact the tone of the passage? And remember, tone is the feeling that the person invokes in people. Get at them is really very informal language, which is something kind of strange. This is informal language. Make sure you remember who is speaking this whole time, who's making the speech? The President John F. Kennedy. Why would he be so informal whenever he's making a speech? He's obviously trying to impact the tone in some way. Make sure you're aware of that. And here's where we have this how we're going to get at them too. That's where it was, to get at them. So how does the phrase get at them impact the tone of the passage? Well, let's look at our answer choices. A, the phrase expresses the author's contempt for the laziness of European children. Now, I will admit, the first time I read this, I kind of got stopped on those two ideas as well. I got stopped on the idea of physical fitness of European children and that being on a decline. That's what I kind of got focused in on. So I can understand this one. But you have to be careful about that. The phrase expresses, what's just the phrase expressing? To get at them too. What got at them? What's he talking about in the sentence? We see it right here. Because in the last decade, what got at them? Mechanization. That's what got at them. Not the sharp decline of physical fitness. What got at them was the mechanization. That's a fancy word for technology, for becoming more technological in nature. The more technology we have, the easier our lives, the more likely we are to sit there and have our decline in our physical fitness. We've seen that as an issue today. So that's where I got stopped. I got stuck on these two ideas too. I only caught it when I was going back through them, which is something you should do as well. So you need to make sure you look at the entire sentence, not just the key details of the sentence, because that can trip you up. So we know now that A is not correct. It's not talking about the laziness of European children. B, the phrase expresses the author's support for the efforts shown by European children. Not at all. These two people were astonished of the decline. We're talking about the efforts and how happy it is. The phrase expresses the author's surprise regarding the research findings. Is the author surprised? No. It's Dr. Krauss and Dr. Weber who were astonished. Not President JFK. He's the author of this. So he's not surprised. He's reading about it. The correct answer, y'all, here is D. The phrase expresses the author's disapproval of the impact of technology. That's what he's saying here with this idea of mechanization being the issue that gets at them, is mechanization, technology. Not he's surprised by them being having a decline in physical fitness. What he's talking about is the mechanization, the growing technology base. It's kind of an interesting key detail you might get checked up on. This is stuff that happens in teachers' brains all the time, understanding this whole passage as a whole. You need to be careful of it yourself and make sure that you're following along with it, that you are trying to incorporate these ideas in your own work. This is a skill, as I said, which we can tell you about, but you have to get it yourself. We're going to go ahead and continue here to our last two questions, and they are Part A, Part B questions. Question 4, Part A, how does the author use rhetoric in paragraph 7 to develop his point of view? We've talked about rhetoric, what that is, how to use it, why do we use it, things like that. So let's look at our different forms of rhetoric in paragraph 7. We'll need to go back and reread paragraph 7 briefly. Paragraph 7 is very short and very easy to read. It says, there it is. We are under-exercised as a nation. We look instead of play. We ride instead of walk. Our existence deprives us of the minimum of physical activity essential for healthy living, and the remedy, in my judgment, lies in one direction. That is, in the developing programs for broad participation and exercise by all our young men and women, all our boys and girls. Okay, so let's look at the different answer choices that we have and figure out which ones are right, which ones are wrong. The author uses sarcasm to communicate disdain towards people disinterested in sports. For one, he did not use any sarcasm. It's not used. He communicated disdain toward people disinterested in sports. He never did that either. So we have one answer already that just doesn't answer it at all. It's a throwaway answer. B, the author uses hyperbole to express panic about the fate and health of the nation. Now, you could argue he did use hyperbole a little bit. He seemed a bit extreme. He used a little bit of hyperbole, but he did not express panic about the fate and health of the nation. He's a president. He would not express panic in almost any situation. So he doesn't do that either. It's only half right. The author uses oxymoron to express confusion about why the public avoids exercise. He didn't talk about why the public avoided exercise. He never did that. Another wrong answer, leaving us with the only correct answer, D. The author uses repetition to show concern about the physical fitness of the country. Yes, we do know he's concerned about the physical fitness of the country. He does use repetition. He repeats himself multiple times, saying, we are, we this, we that. Now I'm saying we. We are under exercise as a nation. We look instead of play. We ride instead of walk. So notice that repetition of that grammatical structure, that repetition is being used there. Not hyperbole, not sarcasm, and not oxymoron. That's just a simple, did I look at the question and did I really look at my answers? It doesn't take very long. If you want to, you can take a full 2 minutes probably with each question, with each answer. But it just takes time and practice getting good with this. Part B feeds directly into Part A in question 4. Which quotation from the passage further develops the author's point of view? Now, we know the author's point of view here. What his goal is to talk about how our nation has become weaker and less physically fit. That's his goal here. So which passage develops that, incorporates that idea that we know from his passage? And we would only know this by reading the passage. Let's start off with D, going to A now. D, the Greeks saw excellence not only in philosophy and drama and sculpture and architecture, but in athletics. Okay, so that is building up the idea of in athletics as well, so that's a possible choice. C, throughout the country, we have found discouraging examples of deficiency and equally encouraging examples of progress. Now, we did talk about a lot of examples of deficiency. We did do that, but we haven't really talked about encouraging examples of progress yet. Doesn't seem to make sense. Why would we have that there? If it doesn't make sense, generally speaking, it's one of the incorrect answers. Just be aware of it. Make sure you read through it first. B, I believe that as a nation, we should give our full support, for example, to our Olympic development program. While that is a good, laudable thing, does that really support his point of view? The Olympic development program is all about a small group of professionals, not a wide range of people. So this doesn't really support his point of view at all. We're left with only 2 possible correct answers. A, the rest of us and too many of our children get our exercise from climbing up to seats in stadiums or from walking across the room to turn on our television sets. And this one about the Greeks. I'll go ahead and tell you here, while the Greeks are important, that's not really his point of view. It is important, and he does talk about it as a reference, as an example, but it is not his point of view that he's trying to make. The only one that really fully incorporates everything is A here. So A is our correct answer. Now, ladies and gents, that is us going through half of the questions here. We're going to be doing the other half tomorrow in class. I will not be making a video for that, but you need to make sure you take your time going through each question and each answer to make sure which answer choice best answers the question, not which one sounds correct. It takes time, it takes effort. So take your time and take all the effort you can to answer these correctly. All right, ladies and gents, that's it for the day. Have a good rest of the night.